Hey, welcome. So, we're all swimming in media pretty much 24/7, right? But have you ever really stopped to think about who's behind the camera? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the media's hidden lens, the invisible forces that shape what you see, and maybe, more importantly, how you see it.
So let's just start with a quick thought experiment. Picture the last movie or TV show you binged. Who are the good guys, the bad guys, the ones who needed saving? What you see on that screen, well, it's not an accident. It's the final product of a whole bunch of very specific choices.
And that right there, that's the absolute key to everything we're talking about today. We tend to think of the media as a mirror, just showing us the world as it is. But nope, it's way more active than that. It's a lens, and a lens can zoom in, it can blur things out, and it frames reality from one very particular point of view.
Okay, let's get into our first big idea. Sociologists have a word for this perspective. They call it the gaze. And here's the thing. More often than not, the people who own and run the media are, well, middle-aged, middle class, and male. So because of that, their gaze kind of becomes the default setting for how all of our stories get told.
All right, so let's put this idea to the test. First up, ethnicity. When the media is viewed mainly through what sociologists call a white gaze, it has a huge effect on how minority ethnic groups are shown. It's not always super obvious, but believe me, it is powerful.
Now you might be thinking, hey, overt, in-your-face racism in the media is pretty rare these days, and for the most part, you'd be right. But the sociologist Stuart Hall argued that it didn't just disappear. He said it was replaced by something a lot more sneaky, something he called inferential racism.
So what on earth is inferential racism? Well, it's not about biology or skin color. Instead, it's all about focusing on cultural differences, things like traditions, family structures, or beliefs, and then subtly framing those very differences as the root of some kind of social problem.
And this slide is a perfect example of a concept called binary opposition. Just look at this really common pattern in news coverage from Africa. Black populations are often shown in one of two ways, either as helpless victims of things like floods and famines, or as the cause of man-made problems like wars. And who swoops in to save the day? The white savior, handing out aid and charity. It creates this really simple, really powerful, and really misleading us versus them narrative.
This whole idea of binary opposition feeds right into another huge concept called otherness. This is when the media constantly, again and again, positions minority groups as being fundamentally different from the so-called norm. They are the other. And that difference is almost always framed as being a little bit strange, a little bit inferior, or maybe even a threat to us.
And here's how that threat gets built. It can be a cultural threat, right? The idea that our way of life is under attack. It can be a physical threat, linking entire groups of people to crime or terrorism. And sometimes it can blow up into a full-blown moral panic, like the Black Mugger scare in 1970s Britain, which, by the way, was later shown to be massively hyped up by the media.
But wait, what about positive images? Surely that's a good thing, right? Well, not so fast. Even those can be shaped by the gaze. The researcher Ben Carrington talks about hyper-blackness. This is where black people are celebrated in things like sports or music, but only in a very specific way. A way that reinforces stereotypes about natural athleticism and animalism, instead of things like, say, intellect or creativity.
Okay, so we've seen how this works with ethnicity. Now let's switch gears and look at age. Because just like there's a white gaze, sociologists also talk about an adult gaze that frames how young people are shown. Again, by a media that's mostly owned and operated by an older generation.
And this adult gaze is, well, it's kind of all over the place. On one hand, you have the innocent child, pure and uncorrupted, who needs to be protected from the big bad world. But on the other hand, you have the unruly teen, rebellious, out of control, who needs to be disciplined by adults. They're presented as both victims and threats, sometimes in the very same news report.
And this fear of young people? Oh, it is not a new thing, not at all. The media has a really long history of whipping up moral panics about youth subcultures. You had the mods and rockers in the 60s, punks in the 70s, all the way up to more recent fears about gangs. It seems like every generation has to have its own scary youth movement.
And what happens is, these groups get turned into what sociologists call folk devils. Their behavior gets totally sensationalized and blown out of proportion by the media until they look like this massive threat to the very fabric of society. But of course, in reality, most of them just, grow up.
So, we've talked a lot about how the media represents people, but that leads to an even bigger question. Why? Why does this happen?
To get at that, we need to zoom out and look at this old, historic split between what we call high culture and popular culture.
Popular culture, or pop culture. That's basically the stuff most of us enjoy every day. Think pop music, reality TV, superhero movies. But historically, the cultural elite has defined it by what it's not. It's not their high culture. And they've often dismissed it as being simplistic, cheap, and totally worthless.
This table really breaks down that classic divide. High culture, like ballet or opera, is seen as difficult, deep, and important. Popular culture, like a soap opera, gets framed as simple, superficial, and disposable. And for a long time, these labels were tied directly to social class. So what's the purpose of pop culture anyway? Well, there are a few competing ideas. Marxists would say it's a tool the rich use to distract the rest of us, to keep us happy and entertained so we don't think about being exploited. Pluralists say, no, the media is just a business giving people what they want. And then the postmodernists come along and say, honestly, that whole distinction is falling apart.
And you can totally see the postmodernist point everywhere, can't you? You've got high culture, like opera music, being used to sell cars in a TV commercial. And at the same time, you have popular culture, like Beyoncé's music, being studied seriously in university courses. The lines between high and low are getting blurrier every single day.
So, let's bring it all together. What we've done here is build a kind of critical toolkit. Ideas like the gaze, otherness, and moral panics, these aren't just stuffy academic terms. They are actual tools you can use to look at the media you see every day with completely fresh eyes.
If there is one single thing you take away from all this, let it be this. Media representations are never neutral. They are always shaped by someone's perspective, by history, and by power.
So, the next time you turn on the TV or you're scrolling through your feed, just ask yourself, whose lens am I looking through right now? What is being put in the frame for me? And maybe more importantly, what's being left out? Now that you know how to see the gaze, what are you going to notice differently?